Hip politics, baby. Three, two, one. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to another episode of the Hip Politics Podcast. Welcome, Hip Politics family. I got a very special on location episode this week. We're all the way out in Nevada, Las Vegas, Sin City, aka City of Dreams. If you're me, you won $100, so you feel like king of the world. But you got your boy, your host here, Cameron Trimble, aka Mr. Cameron Calvin, aka Mr. 216 to the 202, aka Mr. Hip Politics, aka the communicator of color. Unfortunately, my co-host couldn't make it out this week, so Mike McQuarrie, also better known as the mayor of Capitol Hill, is back in D.C. Holding down the fort. But that couldn't stop us. This week is the Nevada caucuses. You've got the Democratic primary debate. The first one with former mayor multi-billionaire Michael Bloomberg on the stage. A lot of drama, a lot of things people have been asking about. And we had to come to Nevada and get somebody local from Nevada who she's had her hands in several political pots over the years, very extensive resume and experience. We have as our special guest today, Miss Yindra Dixon. She's also the owner of the Black Box Consulting Group, who have AFL-CIO, Harry Reid for Senate, Congressman Horsford for Congress, and several other major clients, and also is the co-chair of the Nevada Alliance, along with. If you were to look at her bio, about 6 other bullet points of things that either she's actively participating or getting a check from now that are all politically related, but moving people in the culture forward. So we're going to dive into a little bit of that. But before we do, can you please make sure you go out and subscribe? Remember, we're on the 3,000 subscribers on YouTube. That's where the focus is. We love all the people who've been subscribing on Apple iTunes podcasts. Apparently, we're the fastest growing podcast in Bloomington, Indiana. Thank you. Make sure you go check us out online, hippoliticspodcast.com. Check out the larger hippolitics.org for the full movement. Catch us on social, Hip Politics Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. But make sure you subscribe on YouTube. And then we're launching the Patreon page for some full kind of behind the scenes and some bonus episodes. And of course, I know everybody's been asking about these sweatshirts and t-shirts and hoodies. We're almost there. Pre-orders should be dropping. I said this week. I spoke too soon, so probably in a week. But keep your eyes peeled to all things in politics. Make sure you share and subscribe. So we are here today in Nevada, in Las Vegas, where it's cold. First time I've ever been here when I need a jacket and a coat. But love it. Like I said, I won $100 and I'm done with my gambling for this trip. And things are going crazy. Yindra.
Yes.
Yindra Dixon, owner of the Black Box Consulting Group. Welcome to the Hip Politics Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know you were looking at me crazy, like, well, he has a lot to say before.
No,
like with all these
awesome.
AKs
That's absolutely
and
right.
AKA,
I probably
BK.
need to put down my list, right?
No, hey, this is hip hop. Like everybody's got at least 3 aliases and a nickname.
Right on.
So, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Appreciate to be able to sit down with somebody of your vast amount of experience. And just that can kind of shed some light on Nevada politics, where we are right now. We want to talk a little bit about your background,
Sure.
some of the work you've done, kind of where you see the state of the race in politics right now, and more importantly, how hip-hop, both as a generation and a community, can tap in, because this is a place. While we might not have a ton of rappers from Nevada, Las Vegas, right, they're all stopping through, because at my hotel, Fabulous, Friday, Migos, Saturday, Cardi B, this day. Like, people, like, the Vegas has, obviously, with all the casinos and the clubs and so forth, like, this is a place where hip-hop lives day in and day out, people from all around the world come here and get exposed to it. Things that they may have not seen, or concerts and people that they may not have been able to touch or be in the same room. They're usually not here for political reasons, but they are still an influence. But I do know Nevada has a really cool hip hop scene as well. But your political scene, you guys want to, even though it's not the most populous state, definitely one of the more important states when it comes to being a bellwether, being the second caucus, one of the first 3 or 4 contests every year, both on the Democratic and Republican side, when they're choosing a president candidate. You have a very interesting mix of ethnic mix here in terms of how those demographics have shifted. And then you got Las Vegas and Reno, like two of the biggest casino cities in the country. Right. So it's just and then you got hella desert.
Absolutely.
A lot of desert out here. So it's like when people think, oh, what does America look like? And Nevada may not jump to mind, but I think it's one of the most American places and cities. Places, and being in Vegas is a very, very much so American city. It's and one of the most popular places here is one of the most popular cities in the world, but one of the most important states in the union. But before we dive too deep into Nevada politics, tell me about your work. Like, what got you into? Can I say you're in politics?
Yes, absolutely.
What got you in?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it was kind of like a gang I got jumped in. I would say that politics, I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, which is in the mid-Atlantic. So, information flows, and it's a small town. And so there was always politics around me. My family was always very active in our neighborhood, in our city, in our churches, and whatever. So I felt like politics was just something I was supposed to be doing. So when I met my husband and we moved to Las Vegas because he's from here, I was with child, and there were not a ton of opportunities for me. So I have an undergraduate degree in engineering and an MBA in finance, and there were no huge banks or big opportunities for me to pursue. And so I got my first job after my son was born as an organizer for the Nevada Democratic Party. So I was actually like lit dropping in neighborhoods and knocking on doors. And
that's literature dropping. That means like dropping flyers, right?
Yeah. So basically people party flyer your car. We were doing that from politics all around the city. And it was a short period of time because that's hard work. And I had a relatively newborn. So I had a great mentor at the time who hired me to work at the party, and she was doing some more exceptional work and asked me to be a part of that. And so that was the very first time that we were that the caucus was planned in Nevada in 2008. And so we put together an outreach program called I Can, I Care, I Caucus to effectively mobilize Black voters to get out and caucus. So we had to do education, we had to do logistics, we did mock caucuses and all the things that you would normally do to help people understand what the process was. Back then it was important for Nevada because there were some tools that we have available now that we didn't have then. Caucuses are genuinely an organizing event, so it allows you to bring people together who have a common goal. They get to participate in, a really big field, which is the presidential nomination process is a big deal in politics. It's a big deal in the Democratic Party, and it's a big deal for Black people in general. And so at that time, we were able to institute same-day registration, and that was one of the driving forces for having a caucus, because you can bring people out, and if you get everybody there and they're not registered, then you can register them.
Question, is same-day registration still available in Nevada?
Yes, we still have same-day registration, but now we also have automatic voter registration.
Can you explain that process? What does that mean?
Okay. So through the DMV. So if you get a license at the DMV, if you move here from out of town and you get a new license, or you're supposed to renew your license, you now are automatically registered to vote. So you click a box and they will ask you, would you like to register? You say yes. You click a box and you're registered.
And they're not, are they purging people off of polls if you don't register, if you don't like participate after a certain amount of time? Because I feel like that's one of the trick bags that is going on in like Ohio and Georgia. Oh, just straight purging people is like just because they haven't exercised their right to vote, and then they go and think they're registered and they're not.
Yeah.
Like,
So, I mean, voter suppression is definitely a tactic that has been a part of politics since the Voting Rights Act. And the effort is to make sure that the voices of people of color, and specifically Black people, are not able to be used in any of these contests. Because when we do use our voices and we do use our right to vote and our power, we are victorious every time. So voter suppression is alive and well everywhere. I would be naive to say that it is not here. What I would say is that over the last 10 years, we have turned Nevada from red to blue. So it used to be for, as long as Nevada has been around, it was a Republican state. And over the last really 10 years, we have now what they call the trifecta. We have a Democrat in the governor's house. We have a Democratic leadership and majority in the House as well as the Senate in the state. So that gives us a little more political power.
So with your senators, though.
Sorry?
So with your senators, though.
We have a couple that are, we have one or two that are a little bit crazy, yes. But
we'll dive into that a little bit later. There's two things that you just brought up that I guess we can just dive right into it, sure. And then touch back on to a little bit more of your bio. Excuse me. The caucus system. Mm-hmm. We just saw people who are listening to this now, if they're hearing this, they've a couple weeks ago. If they don't know what a caucus was, they don't know it messed up. That's something in Iowa. It's a state 90% of people don't probably go to. Not on many people's minds. I actually have an interesting history there. My parents lived there for 8 years. My dad was United Methodist Bishop of the state, so it was a Black man in Iowa, coming from Chicago and Cleveland was a culture shock to say the least. But I spent a lot of time in Iowa over those 8 years that they lived there. Never figured out the caucus, and I'm in politics. I saw it, I went, and I understood, but I never fully like I said, it's something that was hard to figure out and understand what was going on. Can you explain to us why you have maybe you don't know, maybe not why. Explain to us the caucus process here in Nevada, because that is about to happen. This is the third state. Whoever comes out of here, the polls are showing it might be Bernie. I know Buttigieg and Biden and other people are polling pretty well. But whoever's coming out of here is going to come out of here with delegates that are going to go help them hopefully secure the nomination. But this is not a state where you just go and vote, count up the votes, and whoever has the most votes wins. It's the caucus system. So if you could please explain that in Nevada caucus.
Right. So the caucus process, it has changed over the years. I think initially, like I mentioned before, it was used as an organizing event. If you expand the electorate, that tends to have a benefit to Democrats. People who get more access to voting tend to vote Democrat. So that was the initial reason why. The way that it works is that a bunch of people show up in their precinct on caucus day, and they can align with the candidate that they'd like to support.
So stop there. When you say a bunch of people show up in their precinct, Who are these people and how do they know to show up?
Right. So they are Democratic voters. You have to be registered as a Democrat to participate in the Democratic caucus. And they will come because it is widely publicized that the day of the caucus is the day of the caucus. So everyone has known when that date was going to be for a couple of years. So Saturday, February 22nd, a number of Democratic voters will report to their precinct location for the caucus. It may not be the normal place that you vote. It might be a different facility because of the space. So, for example, in order to go in and cast your ballot on Election Day in November, They just need a space where they can have tables and you can walk up and, cast a ballot and walk back out. In a caucus process, all of the people have to fit into the space, and then they align with their candidate in a group. And so what happens
Is there a limit on the amount of people that can show up to any one precinct?
No. Your precinct is pre-assigned, so that is a part of the political map. Each geographic location is divided into precincts and then larger districts from that. So you have your county commission districts or your city council districts or your state delegate districts or your state senate districts, your congressional districts, et cetera. But they are all based on the precinct as the start.
Okay.
Once you get to your location, like I said, you align with your candidate. You can also join a group that is considered uncommitted. So you may not want to, you may want to just be with the biggest group, right? You may not want to cast your ballot for a specific candidate. You may decide, I want to wait and see who shakes out, and then I want to go with a bigger group or a different group.
So let me follow this. So if I'm a listener, I'm in Nevada, I want to caucus. I'm a registered Democratic voter. At the next caucus, I'm registered. They tell me the date, so I know the date. I can go online and figure out my precinct and go on probably the Democratic website or
Absolutely.
DNC's website, figure out where my precinct is based on where I live. So I know where to show up. It tells me the time to show up.
Yes.
And there's maybe 3 people I'm considering I would vote for. I go there. I sign up and say, hey, I want a caucus. Now I go into a room and there are groups. Every candidate is represented, and I just walk to one side.
Yes, it's a physical movement of people. You vote with your body.
And then, but I have to pick one person.
You have to pick your first choice, or you have to pick an uncommitted group. So any one of the candidates. So, for example, a lot of the controversy this week is that Bloomberg is not listed on our caucus, our early vote caucus ballots. And so as a result, you would not be able to align with Bloomberg. But if he's your first choice, you could certainly choose, to be uncommitted during the first round of the caucus. So
when you say uncommitted, the first round of caucus, it's almost like, say 100 people show up to one caucus site and they all go into each one. And then there's 20 people who don't know who they want to vote for. That in and of itself is a choice. To say, like, uncommitted, it's like, so I just am going to stand here with these other 20 people and no one has a majority, so no one won that caucus?
So...
or no one won that... Do you see?
Yes.
And I'm
so
not
trying... No. It's that crazy and confusing. So, you walk in. If you are uncommitted, there'll be a sign that says uncommitted. So you will stand with other people who are uncommitted in the first round. Other people who are aligned with the candidate will walk to their candidate group, and then they will tally up for the first round who has enough people standing to move on to the second round. This is slightly complicated because now we have early vote, so I'll talk about that in a second, how that plays into
you can
the
early
totals.
vote at a caucus?
You can early caucus, yes. So, but we will talk about that in a second. So you walk into the gym, you align yourself with a candidate, Elizabeth Warren, and Elizabeth Warren has 50 out of those 100 people. She's definitely moving on to the next round. There is a minimum percentage that you have to reach, a threshold, and there is a formula that's associated with the threshold. Primarily, people think of it as like a 15%. So if you have 15% of the total people who are caucusing,
then that's your threshold to be able
then
to
you can
get
at least
delegates.
move on to the next round.
Oh, to the next round.
Now, another interesting piece of the caucus, and the reason why it sometimes seems a little unruly, is because if you are standing in the uncommitted group, there are a number of supporters of different candidates who will try to sway you to come to their group. So,
are these people who are caucusing, or these are people outside of the caucus proper? They're just there as...
These are actually people caucusing.
Okay. And that's when they were saying, like, each candidate, make sure they have, like, precinct caucus captains. So
Yes.
At every precinct, they want to have at least one or several supporters who are responsible for getting their group together and trying to get more people to come over.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Understood. You know what would help everybody? not even just hip hop. They need to like videotape this and create or like doodle it or create some like a Linda video or something to like, this is how you, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, but they need to like, there needs to be like $1 million ad buy to say like, this is what a caucus is. Cause we got Iowa, it's a bunch of states that, no offense to Nevada, and Nevada's probably the most poppin' state of all the ones, but it's like North Dakota, Kentucky, Iowa, what else? Wyoming. So these are all states that
have large rural populations.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Because I was about to say, these are states that most people aren't thinking about, but
Yes. They have a large number of
very
residents.
rural, low, outside of, Kentucky and Nevada have higher populations, but you're talking Wyoming, North Dakota, Iowa, some of in the low, like the bottom 10 in terms of population. I just don't understand. I understand the caucus system, and thank you for kind of explaining that. Yeah. I did know that. I just felt like I needed our listeners to, hopefully you were able to follow down. I'm going to chop that down and just like maybe put captions underneath it just so I know, follow this step by step. But we just it's one of those things it doesn't feel like it's addressed in the 3.5 year break before we start thinking about it again. And I got into politics maybe during the John Kerry campaign, when he went up against Bush, and that was like my first time really volunteering and trying to understand that. I lived in Philly, but following I was like, this is like algebra 3. Like, I don't get why we're doing this when you could just go in and vote for somebody. Like a standard voting process, which most people think is probably the easiest and most fair way. But I will say this, it does make it exciting and interesting. But I think it would be a great reality show or TV show if you were able to show it. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to vote and pick our leaders. So as much as the entertainment value may be there, but I think the simplicity of the system. But it does cause, like I said, it causes a little more debate, a little more. I think people got to work a little harder. Have you ever been a precinct captain? Or
I have not been a precinct captain. I have physically caucused. In 2008, I physically caucused, and like I said, we ran a bunch of mock caucuses, so I had to demonstrate to people how to caucus.
So you have training sessions beforehand? Mm-hmm. Were you doing this on behalf of a candidate or work you were doing?
Really for the party, just to make sure there was voter education around the caucus process. And then, like I said, we were focused on bringing out Black voters. So in Black neighborhoods and Black community centers and churches, talking to people about the process and then setting up these mock caucuses to make sure that they understood what they were there to do.
From your knowledge, are Black people and Latinos well represented in the caucus system? In Nevada?
So no, certainly,
percentage-wise based on how many.
Right. I would say, the problem is it's a long process. You can imagine if people have to physically go to a space and then they have to physically move around and then they have to be counted and then they have to do a second round until you get to essentially a winner of that precinct, or at least
is that
a first,
hours?
second, and third.
Is it hours or minutes?
Hours. So it's 2 or 3 hours. So how many people do you know that can waste that much time on any day to do anything, right? So.
At least you got it smarter than Iowa. Why would you put a caucus on a Monday?
Yeah, I know.
Like you,
right? But we're a 24-hour town, so at least
and it's on a weekend. So at the least, like maybe that helps. True. This with so many people in the Reno and in the Las Vegas area working in the gaming industry, that's. Like their weekend, every day could be a work day, but at least it's on the weekends. But I didn't get that. Like, why did you want to have the most complex system on a Monday? Like people just coming off the week. Like I don't know.
It's probably just tradition, right? Arbitrarily decided.
Yes, just arbitrarily decided how we choose our leader today. But well, thanks for that breakdown. We're here and we're out here on location. For the Democratic debate in the caucus that is happening. There's a lot of candidates having different rallies, and I think Bernie just had one yesterday. I know Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, had a big event, had a couple events yesterday, but a big event from Mayor Pete is had a couple. I'm pretty sure all the candidates had something, but they were the ones that I popped up on social and that I saw. I'm not going to ask you if you're supporting anybody, but I will ask, who have you seen like represented here? Like being one of the early states, you're getting hit with these ads left and right, and like the big controversy now is that Mayor Bloomberg, who doesn't have any donors, obviously he's self-funding his complete campaign, this is going to be the first debate stage that he's able to make it to. They've changed the rules a little bit, which it could be its own controversy considering several different former candidates were looking for some of these rule changes because you have to have a certain amount of numbers in the polls, coupled with a certain amount of donors to reach those thresholds. Convenient. It didn't just affect candidates of color, but it conveniently affected in our last wave of people dropping out. Were pretty much all the candidates of color in the last 6 weeks per se. Started with Senator Harris in December, and then the trickle effect right down the line right before these primaries and caucuses. But who are you seeing as like who are voters seeing? I know Bloomberg, like I said, has been blasting the airwaves. I don't know if those made it out here. I know Tom Steyer has probably been blasting the airwaves because he's a little more well capitalized. But like, what's the energy like? What's the advertising and like, what's that like?
Right. So I think one thing about the West is it's still kind of like an outpost, even though we are Las Vegas, and so we have lots of entertainers and lots of information that flows through here. I don't know how much of an advantage that is to candidates, except if you have run before, it is more likely for you to have support again. So, for example, I think you'll hear a lot about Bernie polling high because he's run before. Certainly Vice President Biden as well. I think Pete Buttigieg, because he is new and young and gay, I think that appeals to voters. They want to hear about him. They want to know what's going on. So they're more likely to attend his events. I wouldn't say there's any one or other. I think the other significant fact about Nevada that's different than a lot of places is that we have a lot of labor families. So 30% of the residents here are likely a member of a labor union. And so in and of itself is a political animal. And so big unions like the Culinary or SEIU are effective factors in an early process for sure, and in politics in general here. So to that end, I think, yes, my kids can recite all of the Tom Steyer commercials like everyone else. They are watching.
So he's out here.
Yeah, He definitely is getting played. We're seeing Bloomberg for sure, but I definitely think for Democrats, it's hard to look at a Bloomberg as a candidate and really feel like he's going to represent what they consider to be Democratic values. I think Amy Klobuchar is an interesting candidate. You're from the Midwest, so maybe there's something I'm missing. But she definitely is a person who has a good record for winning. She is pretty moderate, and she doesn't have a huge personality, but she's very practical and pragmatic. People look at somebody who is very even-keeled.
You think she's even-keeled?
I mean, I think that you can look at her and think of her as much more even-keeled than, say, a very dynamic Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren, when she gets excited, she gets excited. But I don't feel like Amy Klobuchar necessarily
that's the problem with doing a podcast about politics. So I spent several years working on Capitol Hill, and years around it, and know people who've worked for her now and before. And it's like, I'm always conflicted of like, what am I allowed to say? And what have I heard? Because it's like, when you say even kill, that's what I'm always like,
right.
If you're looking at this, just look at my face. I'm not going to say what I'm thinking. But I get it. I'm curious, before a lot of those candidates of color, and this is the one of the reasons why Nevada is so important in this whole primary system that people, like I said, people don't really have a good grip on it, but they kind of learning through the news and all right, who won? Who's kind of winning? Because now people are finally tuning in. I'm feeling like these next two debates with here in Nevada, and then the next one in South Carolina, which is going to be sponsored by The Root and like more African American based. It's like, all right, now we've had a few wins or losses. All right, I'm tuning into a debate now. Now I'm actually kind of paying attention. Oh, the field is not 20 people; it's like 5 or 6. All right, what are they talking about? But before, when we had a larger field, did you feel any of those, the Senator Harris's, the Cory Bookers, the Julian Castros, even Beto O'Rourke, like, were other people kind of catching fire? Because I look at, like, we have no Spanish speakers. We've got no people of color. Even with the Andrew Yang, him dropping out, and like, I know he was just building a lot of support. I was here in October for the 2020 gun safety forum when we still had a full field. I was actually, ironically, the day Bernie had his heart attack. But I was working that event and just seeing the different supporters, and I was like, oh, I was surprised. I definitely saw some Booker fans that came out, and like, he had a nice little out of a room of 300, he had a nice little 10-15. Castro had had some representation, but I'm just curious, like, was there any energy around some of those candidates? Because this is, we just talked about kind of Iowa and then New Hampshire, both more, at least demographically, are like more rural. Definitely with Iowa, just more racially, a lot more white. So this is like the first state where, even though it's still probably more predominantly white, but there's obviously, like you said, a large Latino population, a much larger black population than the first two states, and then we're going to South Carolina, which has even really large black population. So now you start to get to more of the demographics of both the Democratic Party. Like, I wonder if any of those candidates stayed in just to get get to these two states, if they could have been more viable. Was there energy? Did they have good energy and representation out here, or?
So for sure, I think you'll find anywhere people want to see people who look like them on the stage. Period. Right? They want people to address their issues. They want to be connected to their community. That's how you engage voters. Right? You have to have some kind of connection to them. Cory Booker has some family members who live in Las Vegas, and so I think he has spent a lot of time, even before he was running for president here, and so he had kind of a community that was around him. I think having, a senator from California, where, a lot of people who moved to Las Vegas are from California, it was easy for her to build support here as well. They both had, Kamala specifically, had a really, a large staff and a big group of state office here with workers and canvassers and political directors and all kinds of senior advisors. So they definitely were serious candidates. They definitely were people who could garner support here. Julian Castro, not as much, but not necessarily for any fault of his. I think it was primarily because people have to prioritize where they're going to put their money, and everybody doesn't look to Nevada as a place where a heavy early investment is as important as, say, Iowa or something else. Iowa and New Hampshire really kind of set the stage for momentum. If you're in the bottom 5th or 6th, typically, after that, funding dries up and things like that go away, resources go away. And so it makes it much harder for you to continue in the race, even if you have a really great shot in California or a really great shot in South Carolina. So I definitely think that we are missing people of color in the field. I definitely think people here are looking for candidates who they believe can address their issues. I mean, I just think that they want to. They want people who have those talking points. I think that's why I was so shocked. I have several friends who have said to me that they really like Tom Steyer because he calls Trump a racist on his commercials, and it is, that's very provocative.
He's been invested in the movement. He's a person. I mean, he made his $1 billion, but he's put something back with Next Gen. I've seen like the work that they do, and his ongoing campaign of like TV and internet since the day Trump got elected, like of just like I I'm curious if that helped or hurt him. It definitely created some recognition, but it probably made people form opinions about him. But that's it. That's all right. That's some good insight. It's just in terms of I've wondered, like, man, why couldn't they? I know why they couldn't due to money and resources, but and I think that may go back to which hopefully this is revisited before the next election season. Like, hey, we need to switch up the order of some of these places because even if Nevada was first, while it may not be the most racially diverse state, it is way more diverse than the first two.
Correct.
And it has a mix of two very like big city, small city, a lot of rural. It just has I think a little switch, a little more demographic, and it's a place. Even if it's just been Las Vegas, I feel like also people don't connect to Iowa and New Hampshire. It's like I've never been there.
Yeah,
and probably don't know anybody. People in most other states don't know anybody from there and or has been there. So it's like these two mythical states that I know they exist because I took, because I took geography, but or civics or something. But they're not like. Why do they have such a disproportionate impact on choosing the most important job in the country? In the world, I would say, and choosing our leadership. So it's a very interesting thing. Like, I'd push for Nevada. People would feel probably a lot better if Nevada was first and didn't have a caucus.
We would love a first Nevada primary. I will put that out in the universe.
So we were, and just as you just kind of mentioned, and we were just kind of talking about the overall political scene. But I'm curious. I think one thing, the gift, the small gift in the huge curse that is Donald Trump. This is a semi-bipartisan podcast.
Right on.
I love and respect Republicans. I just don't deal with Trump Republicans. But even then, there's some value there because I got friends who are in the White House who work for him, work on his campaign, work throughout his administration, and they're good people. And they still believe in America and believe in. Sometimes people just gotta hold their nose at their employers, because there's people working for a ton of companies that they don't agree with everything that their employers or their company represents or does or their practices. But that's just where they are with it. But I will say that small little gift in the curse that has been trumped is that he's raised the awareness around just the political scene and environment. He's almost turned it into reality TV and pop culture. The TV business was and the media business was trying to do that beforehand, but he juiced it up and made it something that people, even if they're just unifying to be against him and all the stuff he's done, it's there. I think it's almost had a spike, and now it's almost to a point he's done so much. This is probably part of his tactic. He's worn us all down, so now we are not as on it or, oh, I'm paying attention. He's normal. He's been normalized. His actions and his words are starting to be normalized when things that for hundreds of years would have caused all types of red flags and concerns. But with that awareness and with that negativity has come attention. And I think what we can use positively is bring that attention to increase voter participation, increase civic engagement. When people, our schools our public schools have been grossly under teaching and underserving our youth for years, but this is like a real life civics lesson, and that's kind of what we're trying to fill some of that gap. And just, hey, what are these terms I'm hearing again? Like, most people are just breaking it down to, I don't like Trump. He's doing some wild stuff. What did he do wrong? He got impeached, so why is he not leaving? So then why should I care if he's not leaving? Right. So you're just trying to break down those kind of basic rules in the landscape for people. But like with Nevada being so early in the process, I feel like this is a more politically active state. Like you've had the leader, like Senator Harry Reid, who you've had the pleasure of working for in this campaign, and he's a retired senator, if you don't know, but he was the long-term Senate Majority Leader / and minority leader, depending on when the Democrats were in. They were in the majority in the United States Senate, but that essentially made him literally one of the 2 or 3 most powerful people in the country. And he was, being from Nevada, he was a former he was a former Capitol Hill police officer. And for him to transition, he spoke, he spoke fluent Spanish, from my understanding. But
He was a civil rights lawyer.
Civil rights lawyer, white guy from Nevada, that was able to ascend to one of literally, he's going down in history books. And so I always found that, because he was the leader during some of my time working on Capitol Hill, and as I studied him and got to interact with him, I got to interact with a lot of his staff, hear stories just about the kind of man he was, the person he was. I got a really nice autographed picture with him.
Excellent.
But when I think about that and how it ties back to Nevada, I know Congressman Al Horford. You had Mia Love, one of the rare Black Republicans, come from this state. I was like, well, this is a very interesting political state, and that it seems like maybe people are a little more up on it here than when I say up on politics and up on, at least on the national federal scene. But I'm curious, like, is this like a really politically charged state all the way through, like top down? Like, are people really into their school board and their state senate and state assembly mayors, or is it just, are people just jazzed up for it because you have such an important role in federal and presidential politics? Is that when people are like, oh, I pay attention those 6 months out of every 4 years?
Right. I would not say that our voter participation or engagement is any higher than any other state. People have real lives. They go to the ballot box when the ballot boxes are open, right? So when it's time to vote, they vote. I don't know that we have statistically any larger amount of any one group that votes more than any other. So I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say there's some definite benefits to having a Senate Majority Leader from your state. When it comes to resources that need to come to your state and how things are prioritized, when budgets are set on the national level, that is a significant advantage. I would also say that we do have uniquely a lot of Black elected officials. So there are a lot of the Speaker of the House is African American. The Deputy Speaker, one of the largest districts in the Clark County Commission is African American. Our Attorney General is African American. So I mean, we really have.
Especially with that Attorney General being African American, has that affected maybe some of the laws or how some of that justice has been served down? Obviously, Black and Latinos we're disproportionately arrested and convicted and given longer sentences. Has there been any? Is this the first Black Attorney General?
Yes, he's the first Black Attorney General for the state of Nevada.
So we gotta give him some time to change some things, or is he already
Yeah, I mean, we did restoration of rights for people who are formerly incarcerated. So that represents a large group of people who now have the right to register and vote. We also have a unique opportunity because we're one of the few states that still elects judges for those formerly incarcerated, newly registered folks to advocate specifically for
that's big.
Judges and have a direct impact on the criminal justice system. So I think
that's
is
really,
a
I didn't know
type of
that
scenario.
about here. That's really big. I think that if somebody wanted to get behind something that's really, because I find, especially in the hip hop community, that's always one of the first questions of well, it's something around criminal justice about they feel like we're being locked up, targeted, sent away for too long. People who used to sell weed back in the 80s and 90s, and now it's completely legal, and people are making billions off of it, and tons of corporations have huge farms and warehouses where somebody was selling. If I sold a couple ounces of weed 15, 20 years ago, I could still be in jail right now. So I think, and that's something that's an easy connection for them, and they don't realize, people need to realize of how impactful your district attorneys are and the judges are. So being able to actually vote for the judges, I think is, because that doesn't, a lot of judges are appointed.
That's true.
In so many different states. So I think that's something that
it's
people
huge.
could really mobilize around.
We have a historic number of public defenders who are running for judge. We have a historic number of African Americans, women who are running for judge. So it really does, it changes the landscape for criminal justice. And so I think in support of the first Black Attorney General here in Nevada, we now have an opportunity to build up that infrastructure so that he can make more change than probably he even expected by having these different lenses through which.
And that's Aaron Ford, right?
Yes,
Aaron Ford. Okay. And kind of going back to a little bit about you and what we were just talking. So you were Senator Harry Reid's African American state.
Yep. So we did
statewide African American outreach. Is it during for his campaign or for his? Okay.
Yep. So for his campaign in 2010, we were responsible for all African American voter outreach, and so primarily our job was to turn out African Americans to vote. They did. I believe at the time we were 6% African American, and I believe we turned out for 12% of the vote were African Americans. So, and twice their percentage of their population.
Doubling up.
It's pretty good. Not bad.
We overperformed. Beyond pretty good.
We overperformed.
That's big time in our world. That's big time in our world.
And in addition, it was the Tea Party years, so it was during a time when there were a lot of people who, a lot of Democratic candidates who were not successful. Both here in Nevada and across the country. So so that was a big, it was a big accomplishment for us in Black Box.
I got to do a Tea Party episode. There's very few left. And I was on the Hill during the Tea Party and literally saw that. I had just gotten there a year before and saw how diametrically different everything was afterwards. And I'm like, if there was never a Tea Party, there would never been a Trump. That's my thought. But that's another episode for another day. I think I'm trying to write a column on that, figure out a few more some stats on that. But so now you're currently still, like I said, still knee deep into the political scene, but now you're on the financing side with a PAC or PAC or Political Action Committee. Tell us about the Jet PAC and not like the Rocketeer or like
right. So I
the
do.
Jet PAC.
That's
I do
try to raise
snazzy.
funds.
That's a snazzy name.
Yeah. Hey, you gotta be creative in this world. So I think the next layer of political success for people of color is to get into the money. It drives politics because you have to pay people to do the work. That's why Bloomberg has risen in popularity, because he's overpaying for work that other candidates cannot fund at the same level. And so there's a number of different things.
Boy, is he overpaying.
I mean, is he overpaying? Right. It's a wonderful, luxurious, livable wage that we all wish we know. Just kidding. He's great. And, I think it is great that someone has decided to invest in politics in that way. However, it does unfairly sway where political power is held. And so I think the way that we're able to equalize that is by investing our own dollars into similar products and similar techniques. And so just as a really quick primer, there are two sides to money, the hard side and the soft side. Mm-hmm. The hard side is campaigns and the party. So if you give directly to a campaign or a candidate, that's the hard side.
Which means there's a hard cap. I believe it's 2,700.
It depends on the state.
State. Oh, the state.
So
yes.
the state.
But there's a
well.
So there's a cap for the listeners. There's a cap for you supporting each individual candidate. You can support multiple candidates, but there's only a certain amount of money you as an individual person or you and your spouse are allowed to donate directly to a campaign. In political parties. So that's the hard side. And it's very carefully regulated and supposedly very carefully regulated and observed. But then now there's the soft side. Talk us about that.
Right. So the soft side is where there is I wouldn't say there's less regulation. I would say there are different regulations. Right. So, for example, if you give to a PAC, which is a group of people who decide, and it could be a group that is organized around anything. So you could be organized around a specific issue if you want. You could just be a bunch of friends who want to help some of your friends who are running for office. But you form this political action committee, and you can through that, donate directly to campaigns, or you can fund something that's called the independent expenditure. And so the independent expenditure
DIE.
rose to popularity through the Citizens United decision. And
We've talked about that on here. Like,
Yep.
yeah. Which is,
and in that case, it allowed people to raise money in unlimited amounts to support or oppose a candidate as long as they did not give the money directly to any candidate or campaign. So you cannot interact with the hard side of campaigns. You cannot coordinate with those specific campaigns. And so in our state, there are, our hard side campaign finance is regulated both at the state level and for federal candidates at the federal level. And but there is a unique opportunity for Black power to be amassed in structures like a political action committee. And I think,
so is that what the jetpack is? Why the
Yeah.
why the jetpack? How long have you guys been around? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So
What's the goals?
Right. So the goal of the PAC is to support Democratic federal candidates. It is a super PAC on the federal side. It does have a non-federal account that is regulated by the state, so there are some limits to what who can give and how they can give. But primarily to be able to make sure that we can keep people like Congressman Stephen Horsford, Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Susie Lee in Washington, bringing significant Democratic gains to Nevada, Congresswoman Dina Titus, et cetera. And so what we're able to fund through that is independent expenditures, which include buying ads in the media like Tom Steyer or Michael Bloomberg have done in order to support the candidates that we want. The other benefit is that we're not tied to any one candidate, so we can have an agenda that is specific to the community that I hope to empower, which is African Americans. So I want to make sure that the issues that we support and the candidates that we support are doing the things that are best serving to my community. I think the other pieces, all of the things that we talked about, voter suppression, purging people from the rolls, setting up ID laws, et cetera, around limiting people's voting rights are all because people are afraid of the power of Black votes. And if people don't realize how much power there is in that, there are other ways to quantify that as well. They're afraid of Black money as well. That's why there were things like redlining and other types of policies that are put in place to restrict us from being as successful as we would become without those restrictions. And that is obviously a threat to white supremacy. And so that's...
Organized money in politics is the
Yeah.
most powerful thing. We had a conversation episode not too long ago with the National Press Secretary of the DNC, Brandon Gasaway, and we were just talking about like this, and then I juxtaposed that to another conversation I had with a really well-known DJ J. Claxton on his radio show about voting and just how that voting and organized money, it's like, all right, everybody doesn't have money, but you need to be organized and vote. You need to represent yourself. And then if you can couple that with, like I said, targeted money for ads and to help workers and help get the vote out, yes, people are terrified because they've like, at least on the Republican side, all the stats show if I have fewer voters, I'm going to have a more disproportionate part of the electorate and people support me. But I get wary of the PAC system, and not wary, we need to do it, and organized money is there. But when you have a person like Bloomberg, makes it a little like deflating when this is a man who has, I don't want to misquote the stat, but like whatever the 55, depending on the stock price, billions of dollars that he's worth is like more than, it's like a double-digit percentage of wage earners in the country.
Right.
It's like, yo, this one man represents like 10% of the, like 8, 10, 11% of the country in terms of wages. So if they pulled all their little bit of money up, he can just like crush that by himself. So it's, some of that stuff can kind of get like, oh man, what's the point of fighting? But I'm glad people like you understand the system, using the system, fighting the system, man. Like another PAC, like I said, we talked about the collective, like seeing it's like, hey, it's got to start somewhere.
Yes.
whether you've got the big money to start a super PAC and come in and have millions of dollars on hand, or you just have the organization to start a PAC and got people to come on hand to put the elbow grease in addition to their money to it. I'm glad somebody is expounding that world for good, I would say, or for groups that have not been represented in the organized money space. Right. I think there's space for hip hop to do a lot more and to work on the organized money space and really and educate the community, our larger hip hop community, about why that's a good place to put $25, $10 a month.
Right. Well, when I originally conceived of another organization I work with called Empower.33. So it is a 501c4, which means it can advocate. It's a social welfare organization. It wants to improve the social welfare of a specific community. But I think what it does is it helps to connect how that money should flow, which is not only should we get people out to vote, we should engage them around their issues so they can take power back over their lives. Everything that's happening to you politically, you have the opportunity to change. You just have to know where to go. And I think that's when we talk about politics being local, that's what we're talking about. I think the other piece is you have to hold those elected officials accountable, and then you have to advocate on behalf of your issues. So not only do you need to, do one part of that process, you have to do the entire full circle in order for you to see how that money can create power for you, and how that engagement can create power for you. So I think that's important for people to understand, is that it does not take a lot of money, and especially if you're talking about aldermen's races or school board races or city council races.
These are five digit at best,
right,
expenditure races. So it's like this race, if the amount of money spent is $20,000 between two candidates, yes, your little $50 counts.
It does.
Your $10 counts, because that is a significant percentage. But even more so, I think people's voices and their actual manpower and using their voice to talk to their friends and family, or going out there to door knock, lit drop. All of that matters, and those are things that can be organized through a PAC. That's dope. I'm looking forward to seeing more. Let us know how we can help. I know it's if you heard it, you might be chuckling. If you're in hip hop, you're like, so they got the hard and the soft. It's not that. This is very different hard and soft money. We're talking about a whole. If you didn't get it, you didn't get it. But maybe that's just where I listen to too much rap music, so that's probably where I was like, somebody else is gonna laugh at this. But thanks for sitting with us. This has been enlightening. We will definitely look to follow up. Like I said, if you have anything that you wanted to share about the Jetpack or any of the other organizations you're working with, Nevada Alliance, or things that please feel free to send just information. I just want to be an information platform. The whole point of how do I get it on social? How do I get it on Facebook? How do I integrate it into our monthly newsletter? I definitely don't have all of the answers. The whole point is me trying to bridge these two worlds. So I need as much trusted and good information, but trusted information around these things, around where people, I'm starting to hear more now that we're getting more feedback of oh, that was great. What can I do?
Yeah.
Can you,
absolutely,
in this, we'll kind of wrap up. If a person is listening right now, they're not from Nevada, they don't live in Nevada, but they want to get involved. Maybe they got a couple dollars, but they've got energy, they got a computer, they got a phone.
Right. So
they want to do something. What's the top thing you think, other than register to vote? I think enough people have been saying that, and so the number one thing is still register to vote and vote.
Yes.
That is still the number one thing. You
Absolutely.
agree?
I do agree.
Okay. So what's the number two thing they should do? Because literally I asked that question, and it's the vote, and it's been 7 of the same answers. So it's yes, please, the number one thing is still voting, people. But what's another thing that somebody, if they're here and they just want to get involved, they want to from afar?
So I don't think it's the money. I think the money is a later stage. I think people have to understand the value of the money. You have to, we got to educate donors, and we have to, develop them. So I think that part will come. I will say, definitely vote and register to vote. Register a friend and get a friend to vote, and then convince somebody who has been talking about not voting to vote. Because really, the way that we are able to execute our power as citizens of the United States is through voting, and there are so many countries where it is not possible for them to look like me and have a voice in their government, and we have that opportunity. There are always 1,000 different ways to get involved in politics and government. And so I would also think about what your passion is and align that to any type of board or commission that is available for you to serve on so that you can understand how these policies get made. For example, in Nevada, we can pass a law in the state legislature, and then in order for them to execute that, they have to put together a board or commission in order to operationalize that policy. And it may not go directly to an existing government agency. And so we always have to have different types of citizens from different types of backgrounds.
Who are on the different
and
various
industries.
commissions
Yep.
and so forth.
Who sit on commissions and boards. And you could be, if you're passionate about
And
bike
can
riding
regular
or-
people get in that, or do you have to be in like?
No, it's a public process. So it's just a matter of going to your government websites, which are, filled with information that you most likely are not interested
DC
in.
has a
but there's
ton of
definitely-
commissions and people. I look to be on one, but a ton of people can participate in that process. So that's something I definitely recommend, understanding like the public commission process. And if there's a way you want to get involved more than just showing up to a meeting and sitting there and letting people talk to you, like look up, see if your state or city or has various commissions that you can, as just a regular citizen, you don't have to be rich, you don't have to work for any specific person. That's good.
Yeah,
That's
I think
good.
the third thing. Am I allowed to add a third
no,
thing?
you have to. It's your world. Let us know.
Is it? I think the third thing is just become an informed citizen, right? Really look at the news and try to discern between the real and the fake. Check more than one source. I absolutely believe in social, and the power of social has been incredible for so many things within politics. And I think it is something that we should continue to build on. But I definitely think people either need to become a trusted source for their followers, for their friends, or at least go that extra step and read a little more, understand a little more context around what's happening, check one or two news sources so that we can stop spreading fake news and myths, because that's keeping us from really realizing the political power that we have. And then my final point is, please fill out the census form the way that money is distributed.
The executive director of the census
Yes.
is coming up on a show in a couple weeks.
Yes.
And I'm trying to build an event, a local event around that. Like,
Be
boy,
counted.
if we don't get counted, like this is not the government coming for. If people need to realize that. If they know, if they want to find you, that people are going to find you. So get off that.
Right.
But you not filling out the census form and not counting who's in your house, not making sure other people are counting and really standing up is going to affect your roads. It's going to affect your streets.
Your
it's going to affect your health care.
Your
it's gonna
benefits.
affect your benefits.
Your
who
schools.
represents you. Like
Everything.
if you feel like our schools, which they aren't being invested in properly, they're not getting the right books, they're not getting the right technology. This not being counted to the census allows them to say, oh, they're not even that many people there. Let's take a little more money away. So if you thought it was hard now, it'll only get harder. Like that is the long game.
Amen.
That is the long political game. So please, census. If you hear this and you get a census form, fill that shit out now. Please. Yes. Thanks. All right. That's one of my little census public work. I've been on the census train heavy for the last. I mean, I always knew what the census was, and I've worked on it. It was an issue I worked on during the 2010 census. Got to learn through Texas state politics and some work I was doing there. But man, now understanding how they cut back some of the budget, so they're not going to kind of run a practice census, which they do. They usually budget to run 2 or 3 of them. Mm-hmm. They cut them all out, so it's just like maybe one practice and the full size run, and they've crippled. Trump has crippled them with money, crippled their budget and their staffing. specifically because he wants people to be undercounted and.
Yeah, and he wants some people to be overcounted. And so they're even, launching campaigns to ask people to fill out census forms that aren't even actually associated with the official census. So please, people, fill out census forms.
All right, last question. Top 5, dead or alive. This is a question we ask all of our guests. This is still very hip-hop. Hip-hop is built on top 5 lists. Like, who's your favorite this? Who are the top 5 rappers of all time? Who's the top 5 producers of all time? Top 5 women artists? Top 5 New York rappers? Whatever. You're in the generation. You're in the hip-hop generation. You're smack dab in the middle of it. Even if it's not rap's not your full thing, there's got to been at least 5 artists.
Right on.
That throughout
I can
time.
answer.
You can answer?
I can answer.
You can answer? I'm not, this is not me casting any aspersions on like, is she in it? You wouldn't have been on if you didn't know.
That's
so who's your top 5?
Yeah, so and in no particular order,
Okay.
Just in case someone is listening that knows me, I would say KRS-One. I love
The
Talib.
teacher.
I love Talib Kweli. I'm from Delaware, so the Roots played a very, very big part of my growing up.
I was about to say,
So
who's
it's gonna
from
say
Delaware?
Nobody.
Oh, yes.
So Black Thought. I would say I have to say Biggie.
Why do you have to say Biggie? I mean, I say Biggie too, but why do you?
Because I feel like with all music, just like my husband's a big fan of R&B, but I think there's certain times in your life where you're framed by the music of the time. And I think Biggie represented that for me, a time when I was framed by hip hop. And I also remember my mom, who is like a classical piano teacher, who called me and was like, "I can't believe Biggie died," and I was like shocked that she even knew who he was. Right? So that's significant to me. I don't know, a fifth person. I mean, there's so many people. I love Mos Def.
Do you love Mos Def or is he in your top 5? There's a big difference.
I know.
Because you just said we got Biggie, we
Yeah.
got KRS-One, the teacher.
Yeah.
We got
Talib.
Now, did you say you were trying to use the Roots, or you're saying Black Thought?
Black Thought.
Black Thought, and Talib Kweli. It's a strong, seems a little East Coast conscious rapish vibe,
it is
but that's
conscious.
good. That's strong.
It is
all
East Coast,
classics,
all those
all legends, all super like official legends. Even minus Biggie, but even I would say Biggie dropped knowledge too. For him to be so young. I mean, he partied way more than he was knowledge dropping, but he dropped some knowledge too.
We were partying at the same time, so maybe that's why I was in alignment.
Low key,
Right.
10 crack commandments. As much as I'm obviously not advocating for selling crack or drugs, but the parallels you can get from just how you should be moving periodly in life, no matter what, not even just selling something.
Yes.
Like there's some things you can garner, and I've seen people actually make analogies from that song to or other, like this is what you should, the do's and the don'ts of quote unquote the overall game, not just taking that metaphor of drugs and taking it out of that context and using it for your everyday life. So I use, when people say dropping knowledge, I was like, actually, if you go back and listen to the 10 crack commandments and strip away the crack part,
Yes.
there's some good commandments in there.
That's absolutely right.
So you said Mos Def, is he in the top 5 or you just like him?
I feel like I feel like he's
Yassine Bey, he just put out an album in a museum in I think it was Germany or somewhere like Spain or something, which I don't know. I mean, I guess it's something different, but it's like, if I don't go there, can I just never experience this album?
You're so funny. Well, I mean, anyway, there's a whole lot of politics.
There are a lot of politics in there. But so who's your fifth?
Okay, who's 5? Probably Jay-Z. I mean, but like, I know.
See this? Probably. Hold up. That's funny. You said I feel like I have to say Biggie, but it's only probably Jay-Z. I feel like most people say I have to say Jay-Z and probably Biggie. But if Jay-Z's in there, why? Why is he here?
So I feel like Jay-Z, I feel like the reason why I would consider him one of my top 5 is because I remember those very, very early Sean Carter albums and how he has come from, being an underground rapper to some extent to this This multi-millionaire with a huge platform. And I think watching that kind of growth in someone, you could maybe even align that with Kobe, right? From being a really young player who had a certain type of way about him to becoming this full man, and watching that progression in his art. I think that's what I respect about him. And so that would make him one of the greatest for me.
So we got Jay-Z, Black Thought of the Roots, Talib Kweli, Karis. Tell me about Talib Kweli real quick. Why Talib? Why is he jumping?
I don't know. I would say I'm just super conscious, and I just really love Talib. Like
have you been watching his new show, his podcast?
I haven't. I should.
I think it's the Power to the People or People. It's on Up Rocks.
Okay.
It's YouTube. Amazing conversation. I actually we were lucky enough he came and he DJ'd and performed at one of our homecoming parties this past year, and got to chop it up with him for a little bit. He's got a great show, great podcast. The People's Party is the podcast where he's some activists, some legends in hip hop and entertainment. He's got some really good interviews, and he has some really good insight. And you start to understand. I mean, you already knew he was a smart guy. Both his parents are professors, but it's just, I was like, oh, he should have been doing this, because he's super hip hop. He understands. He's considered conscious by many, but he's still a regular ass dude. He's got a nice little bit of ratchet in him. He's from ultra New York, so he comes with that. But he's moved around, like he's got a big name in the South and the West. He's done songs he does a song with Gucci Mane.
Yeah.
Like, so he's well rounded and super well respected. He's had a few hit records, so it's like he can speak from what that's about, and he's still very relevant and moving around today. Even after being in the game 20 plus years or 20 years or so. So I think he's a underappreciated legend in the game. Like most people, like you say, Karis One, even if people didn't know Karis One, I feel like he's a Rakim level of like, he's just always given that. It's like, I don't even really know his music that well, but I'm giving him that respect because of when he came in at such an early time. So I feel like he gets some of his just due. But Talib is a person I feel like, man, he needs to get way more just due than he's one of those first few people to really make conscious rap like marketable and financially viable. He opened the door for the Lupe Fiascos of the world or something like that, the Kendrick Lamars and the J. Coles and stuff like that, with some of his work. But that's a strong top 5. I like that.
So I do have one question for you, because my son and I had this conversation.
Sure.
So my son
I thought I was interviewing.
No, I know. Sorry.
No, here you go.
My
Go
son, he's an actor. He's 13, so he's been involved in acting, and he loves Lin-Manuel Miranda, and he believes him to be a hip hop artist. And so I wonder when we think about hip hop and the its development and growth, do we consider
Lin-Manuel an artist? He is an artist, obviously.
Yes.
A very impactful artist. Would I call him a hip-hop artist? No.
Okay.
I think what he did with Hamilton and the fact that he can rap and has done extensions from Hamilton is a piece of hip-hop. But if he was writing all his different plays in that cadence, and like I'm the rap playwriter, like I'm the hip hop playwright. So no matter what I'm covering has a hip hop angle to it, and I'm writing raps with it, and I'm rapping because he can rap and freestyle. I've seen him. It's fun. I swear, people, I'm not making this up. You can check my IG. So I just was with Lin-Manuel for a major award ceremony we were working on that he was honored. Michelle Obama presented him, the American Portrait Gallows, in November. And he did like a freestyle at that event. And he raps. So yes, but I don't think he's not putting out albums. Hamilton has its own thing. He did curate a Hamilton themed album and the Hamilton music that he wrote. I don't know if I'd have to check to see if he wrote all of that. but it's like I struggle with it because it's not what it's what he got known for, but it's not what he just does.
Okay.
But he could easily convince me by doing another hip hop play. If he got two, then it's like, all right, yeah, he could be an artist.
Okay.
He could be considered as such, but he can rap by far, and he's an artist in the truest sense of the word. But that's a good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that up on the poll. Is Lin-Manuel Miranda the writer director of the Hamilton, the hip hop presidential play? It's taking the world by storm. Do you consider him a rapper, or is a rapper or just an artist? Hip hop artist.
A hip hop artist.
Hip hop artist. There, I think he might fall under the umbrella because you can.
Yeah, you can expand it.
You can expand it a little bit, but there's that.
Well, thanks.
Well, okay. You can. I guess that's like the non-answer answer.
Yeah.
But
all good.
he needs to put out. Let him drop another project, and then I'll put him on the list. But until then, just because you can rap and freestyle does not necessarily make you a hip hop artist. But he is definitely part of the culture. He's part of hip hop by far. By far, he's expanded it into a whole nother lane that didn't really exist before him.
That's right.
So I would do that. But I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for taking some time to be with the podcast, be with me, and talk about some of these really important issues, for enlightening us on Nevada politics, Vegas, the caucus system, the hard and the soft of money in politics, and a very cool top 5. I appreciate it, Yindra. This is the part where if you got any announcements, or if you want people to follow you, or you're just playing it from the back, I don't need it. I'm not on social. Anything you want to get out there and advertise and promote and tag, please do.
Right on. So I am on Twitter as Twindra, at Twindra. I will have at Empower360. That's the letter MPOWER 360.
MPOWER 360.
Yep. And that'll be IG. We'll probably have Snap and everything else. And that basically will be the place where you can go to make sure that your news is not fake and to find out what we're doing in our community to engage people and to use those strategies in your community too. So that's it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, for all of our fans out there in podcast land, you can check us out. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud. Make sure you can subscribe there. If you just Google Hip Politics Podcast, even the Google Podcast will probably come up quick, but all platforms are there. We've got the YouTube popping. Please subscribe. I'll stop whatever you're doing. Pause right now. Go on YouTube. Push subscribe. Hip Politics Podcast. Like I said, we're trying to get to that 3,000 number. Got a special surprise when we do. And then we're launching again. Like I said, on social media. Follow us. Hip Politics News. You can follow the Hip Politics Podcast as well on Twitter and Instagram. Politics News on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can follow me at Mr. Cameron Calvin on all platforms. My co-host, Mike McQuarrie, DC Newt 90. And you're going to forget all this anyway, so I'll just put it in the comments. I'll put it in the comment section. But this has been another amazing episode, live on location from Sin City itself, outside the Strip, but in a very cool space. They're out here in Vegas. They're really putting on for entrepreneurs and growing businesses. So we're out in the Bottega Exchange.
Yes.
The Bottega Exchange co-working space. Check it out if you're out here in Vegas ever. But live from Las Vegas, you have the Hip Politics Podcast. And like that, we're out. Peace.
Shorty, you the no filter. IG pic, no filter.